Hi, my name is Richard Moss.
Hi, my name is Daniel Richardson, and this is the SEGA Lounge.
Welcome to the SEGA Lounge, where we celebrate our love for all things Sega, including the games, the music, and the community. I'm your host, KC. Join me as I talk to different guests and learn more about their projects and passion for Sega. Hello and welcome to the SEGA Lounge. This is episode 252. My name is David, aka KC, and this is your podcast dedicated to all things Sega, the music, the games, the community, and all things in between. And as per usual, I am not alone. This week, for the first time this season, we have a proper interview, a proper return to the original format of the SEGA Lounge. And I have my illustrious guests here to my right. We're talking about a very special piece of media that's fresh out of the oven, a documentary that I'm very excited to tell people about. So from my right, or immediately to my right, we have returning guest Richard Moss. Hello, Richard.
Hello. Good to be here again.
Excellent. So for people who might remember last season's episodes, Richard, you were here to promote not a documentary at the time, but a book, right?
Yeah, a book about soccer games for the many Americans listening. A Tale of Two Halves, the history of football video games, because it's a British publisher and it's actually called Football. Soccer is the short form.
It should be called Football
That's
everywhere.
a massive book and a fun discussion that we had.
That's true. And so that's why this time you're returning to talk about something completely different.
Still games.
Still games. Yes. That's the similar part. Would you like to introduce us to our second guest, to your right, please, Richard?
Yeah, so to my right is Daniel Richardson. He is a producer on the documentary that we're going to be talking about.
Excellent.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, Daniel. Very nice to have you here. Yeah. So, Richard and Daniel, you're involved in the making of TerrorBytes documentary, The Evolution of Horror Gaming, right? So, from football to horror. More in common than people might think.
There's even a game in development. I saw on Kickstarter someone is combining football with like Resident Evil. It's a football survival horror game. It looks insane.
I need to get on this. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I need to get on it as well. Yeah. It's like what's that one the game with the kid? It's like a platformer with you play as a kid who has a football.
A soccer kid.
Oh, a soccer kid, yeah. Of course. Yeah, that was just obviously most obvious title ever.
The other one is Marco's Magic something.
Magic Football?
I forget exactly.
Maybe? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's it. So maybe that's it, but with like a horror theme. Maybe, I don't know.
No, it was like I saw a picture. It was like they've got a football field. It's 3D, and for some reason there's like zombies trying to kill you while you're kicking the ball.
Sounds fantastic.
If anyone was into like the Amiga days and they remember Sensible Software, it's a bit like one of their demo things that they gave to magazines, where they took Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer and combined them together. And so the dudes who are like in Argentina kits or whatever it was are blowing up the other dudes who are their opposing team. It's like we're just blowing each other up. It seems like it's sort of a 3D version of that.
Okay, that's amazing. Is it Fear FA98? Is it what it's called? I just randomly
maybe
like
I don't know. I can't remember.
Maybe
the name.
it is. Maybe it is. I just googled it. Google like soccer horror game, and that's what came up. So maybe that's it. Anyway, Amazing concept. So maybe that's the future. So next time you're on this show, you're going to be talking about like a book or a documentary about football horror games, or maybe the one football
An
horror
exciting
game that exists.
subgenre that I'm sure will emerge.
Exactly. So, Richard and Daniel, thank you very much for coming. I usually like to start with like a little bit of an overall look into my guests' lives in gaming. Richard, we did that last time, so I'm gonna spare you from that this time. But I'm gonna start with you, Daniel. So, how did you get into gaming? Like earliest, best memories?
Well, really appropriately considering we are on the Sega Lounge, my very, very, very first game that I ever played was Alex Kidd in the Miracle World on the Sega Master System.
Nice.
And there is a home video of me playing that game before I could like walk. And it's a really fun video. Like my older brother, is gave us the controller, and everybody's kind of laughing and going like, "Oh, look, the little baby's playing games and all that." And then my brother is like, "Mom, he's like actually doing it though." And like, I don't know, something just switched on in my brain, and since then it's been full hog on games. I love Nintendo and Sega, especially. If I could name my like top franchises, they're all very much in that ballpark. My tippy top would be mainline Mario 3D platformers, the Yakuza series, which obviously big Sega title at the moment, Legend of Zelda, Jet Set Radio, and just to throw off the scent, Metal Gear Solid. So we're going to throw that aside. And then just like survival horror as a kind of like umbrella catch-all is just in there. I'd have a hard time. I think maybe my favorite game of all time is Silent Hill 2. Depending on what mood I'm in at the day. If I'm a little bit sad, it's Silent Hill 2 because that's a sad boy game. But I've been playing games religiously since literally as far back as I have, memories. I'm very, very much like in the culture, if you will. I have a Legend of Zelda back tattoo. I have an Undertale Deltarune on my arm there. It's just off screen downstairs, but I've literally just got a package of Shadow the Hedgehog Converse style shoes. So very, very much in the scene. And if I ever need to prove me credentials on the spot, I can recite almost the entirety of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle Script off by heart, as can all of my friends, and we regularly do that as a fun activity.
Okay, so please do. No, I'm kidding.
We'll be here a while. It's got a few cutscenes, that one.
Maybe we'll call you back for just like that. Like, we'll just
do a one-man show.
Yeah, just a one-man show. Exactly. I'll bring the popcorn and enjoy that. Okay, that's amazing. That's amazing, and especially that last part. That's amazing. Yeah, good job. So, how did you get into horror games? Because obviously, Alex Kidd in Miracle World, we can say, one could argue that's in itself a horror game of sorts.
The Rochambeau segments certainly are.
Yeah, it's difficulty.
They gave us nightmares.
Yeah. But proper horror games, how did you get into those?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one actually, because for them being kind of like my lifeblood now, to the point like, I've sort of made my love of horror games into a career, at least temporarily. I got into horror games quite late in the sort of cycle of my life. I remember playing Resident Evil 1. I can't remember if it was direct as cut or not. It was the one with the PlayStation 1 disc had the eye, and the hole in the middle of the disc was the pupil. I can't remember if that's direct as cut or not. But the reason I was able to get Resident Evil 1, because my parents were very much of the opinion of like, you shouldn't play games over your age rating. I went to a car boot sale and I found a wallet, when people would carry like CDs in a wallet.
Yeah.
And it was like a CD wallet, and it had a bunch of PS1 games in. And, if you flick through the first few, it was just things like Spyro and Crash and Croc 2. And then I noticed a little further in was Resident Evil. And I think this guy was just selling the whole wallet for like £2.50. And I'd said to my mom, like, hey, can I have this? And luckily for me, she only checked the first few discs and she was like, yeah, that's fine. You can have Bugs Bunny Lost in Time. So I, unbeknownst to her, acquired Resident Evil at the tender age of, I think I was about maybe 10 years old. And I was always interested in horror. It was very much a taboo in my household. I remember when I picked up this games mag. I want to say it was PlayStation Magazine, and they had an excerpt on nightmare creatures, and somehow that got into the hands of my mother. She read this excerpt and it was explaining a scene in which someone gets stabbed in the game, and she was like, yeah, not reading any more of that one, not getting you this magazine anymore. Took it off us, tore it up and went in the bin. So I was always like, ooh, horror's like kind of taboo, kind of naughty, kind of interesting. And we had a small TV in the living room that I was allowed to kind of shift my console over to, just a tiny little CRT, whenever my mom wanted to use the main TV. And so I remember the first time I played Resident Evil, it was like infinitely scarier than it already would have been to a 10-year-old boy, because my mom was watching, so my mom's watching like EastEnders or some soap opera over there, and I'm like turning the CRT like just away and kind of tucked in the corner with this controller, and I start to play Resident Evil while kind of like whale eye and like just giving a little side eye of like, is she gonna notice this? And I knew about the dogs. The dogs get everybody in that game when it jumps through the window. I knew about them because I'd read about them in magazines. So I walked into that room like prepared, and I was like, psyched myself up, and I didn't get scared by the dogs. But I still was like very much on edge of like, this is a tense atmosphere. There's zombies and stuff. I'm way too young to be playing this. And also like my mom is right there. It was the first zombie. You go into a room and there's a zombie dead on the floor. And, you know, I'm completely brand new to horror at this point. So I'm like, zombie media is kind of new to me. I understood the concept of zombies through like little kids when they appear in kids cartoons and stuff, but I'd never seen the trope of like the dead one that seems dead and then it's alive. And there's a bit where you go in and you open a chest at the back. It's just after you do the statue puzzle to get the map. And then as you come back out, if you walk into the zombie sort of path, it bites your ankle and it's like a big jolt. And I just remember immediately like wanting to scream and just slamming the pause button. And I just sat there for like 10 minutes looking at the screen, just white knuckling it, whole like shaking and trembling, but I couldn't react because my mom was right there. And I just stared at the screen, looking at the health bar, not wanting to unpause it, not wanting to confront it, just internally screaming. And then I turned it off and went, I think that's enough of that. I don't want to play this game anymore. But that moment was so pivotal for us, even though it was horrible in the moment, that it really got its hooks into us. And as I got to college and my interests were less moderated, I went into survival horror hard. So I did film and media at college. And my first student film was inspired heavily to a blatant extent, really, by Silent Hill 2. So that's kind of like when it just had me. And I think horror games have been, it sounds perhaps a little corny to say, but horror games have been some of the most important games in my life. Silent Hill 2 is a very, very, very important game to me. It's provided me with a lot of catharsis during like times of grief and whatnot. I've grown absolutely fascinated by the Resident Evil series and have played them through with friends, and we've had big like bonding experiences through kind of literally going through, you know, marathon in the whole series. I love, you know, and I'm not just kind of like, obviously it's Silent Hill and Resident Evil's the obvious ones, but like one of my favorite horror games is a game called Yuppie Psycho that seemingly nobody but I have played. It's by a little indie studio called Baroque Decay, and it's an office workplace survival horror 2D sprite game, and it's incredible. And yeah, I've just been like immersed in that world since really Silent Hill 2 took hold. back in college. Like horror has been like such a definitive constant in my life since then.
Okay. I mean, I think that story alone, like the Resident Evil story alone, should be enough to convince people listening to this to get TerrorBytes. So thank you very much, Daniel, for sharing that with us. So Richard, same question. Obviously, gaming is a big part of your life as well. We already know that. But horror games specifically, how did you get into those, and how important are they for you?
Yeah, it's a bit weirder for me. For Dan, horror has become an obsession. For me, it's more a mixed relationship. When Dan brought us the idea for TerrorBytes, I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I've never been a huge horror guy though. And then as we get deeper into it, I was realizing, well, actually, it's not entirely true. I've always actually been really into horror moments and like horror elements. What I've not really been deeply into is survival horror and the stuff that's synonymous with horror in the gaming space. I had played the big PS1 horror games, but only in demo form. I played Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis on a demo disc, a couple of other things that I've forgotten what they were on the demo disc. I never got deeply into that world. I've never finished any survival horror game ever, except no, I didn't finish Alone in the Dark either. I've never finished a survival horror game, but I've played a bunch of them. And Dan mentions the dogs. The dogs in Resident Evil didn't get me, but the dogs in Alone in the Dark did. I played that as a teenager in emulation, and I'm like fighting against the controls because that's what you do in that game. You're like, why are you moving so slowly? And then suddenly, something came out the window. And it happens twice. It's the tricky thing with Alone in the Dark. They do it to you in the attic, and then you go downstairs and they do it to you again in a bedroom. And it's like, that's evil.
And that shouldn't work again, right? But it does.
The second time is worse because the second time you're in this tiny room and you've already got a zombie coming to get you, and then the dog comes out. It's like, oh, I've got to fight two things at the same time, and there's a ridiculous game where you're swaying and you're doing these slow punches to try and kill people, and these ridiculous kicks. That's a scary game in a much less sophisticated way than we know survival horror for nowadays, but very effective. Outside of that, I actually realized pretty early on that I've always enjoyed when games dip into horror. One of my most memorable gaming experiences ever is Max Payne's nightmare scene. Anyone who's played the game knows exactly what I'm talking about. You are in Max Payne, basically a comic book superhero dude. Like, he can go into bullet time like John Woo movie. He can inject himself with painkillers. He's pretty much this unstoppable force who can just take bullets forever. But then suddenly you go into this like flashback nightmare thing where he's reliving the moment when he got framed for the murder of his wife and baby, and you're hearing the baby crying. You're walking through this dark room along a red line. You're hearing his wife screaming about how Max, don't do it, because they went full in on this thing, and it's so terrifying and just like made me shake when I'm playing it. It's so powerful a moment. But then also like Tomb Raider, my favorite games of all time. I'm actually right now wearing, I can see there's heaps of horror elements in all of the games. The newer ones, the Survivor trilogy, have some pretty severe body horror, and a bit in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I think that's the third one, where I was totally freaked out because I had to fight and kill my favorite animal, a jaguar, which I was like saying, my wife was watching me play the game. We were going through the whole game together, and I'm like saying to her, I don't want to do this. I want to avoid this. I want to go away. I want to leave the cat alone. and the game is just, it's not letting me move on. I have to fight this jaguar, and
That's a
not
different kind
just
of
like the
horror.
classic game running around shooting. It's you've got to get up close and personal. You have to be like one-on-one, up close with this animal and really face it. And so that for me was really horrifying. But then if you go back to the classic games, there's heaps of horror in those too. The first game, you've got like the Atlantis levels. Looks like you're inside of the human body with the textures on the walls. It's really freaky. Also in Tomb Raider 1, I remember the Midas statue. It's pretty frightening if you touch that accidentally the first time. You don't know what's going to happen, and then you're, oh no, what's happening to Lara? As she slowly turns into golden statue. And of course, there's the jump scare moments of like, oh, a trap is suddenly set. You've sprung a trap. There's a boulder coming after you. The floor is shaking. You've dropped through something. You land on some spikes. The Indiana Jones, Prince of Persia type stuff. But Tomb Raider 2 is the big one for me. It's like my favorite game of all time. There's a level where you start underwater. It's called 40 Fathoms. You're in the darkness. You don't have any breathing gear. You don't have anything to protect yourself in the water. You don't know where you are, where you're going. You have to find your way to safety before you drown, while 2 sharks are chasing after you. It's harrowing experience. Great tension. I love it when games get tense, when they make me unsettled. I'm not into body horror. It's just gross. It's yucky. It doesn't scare me so much as make me go, that's yuck. Why are you showing me this? I get that horror feeling more from thinking about those terror experiences. You've put me on edge.
Yeah.
Or you've messed with my mind of what is going on here. That can be really effective too. And that's the kind of thing I'm more into, and that I like it the most when it catches you by surprise, when you're not like wallowing in it. Like Silent Hill, amazing game, the first few Silent Hill games, but you're in it the whole time, and I get tired of it. Why am I continuing to walk through this fog that's just it's encroaching on me? It's crushing me under the weight of this fog, and how sad the games are and everything that's going on. And I get a bit sick of it. I want to have some nice happy moments for a bit, and some change of pace. I like a bit more of a change of pace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I get it. Yeah, like I was saying before we started recording, I think to you, Richard, I'm not a big horror fan. But as I was watching the first couple of episodes of TerrorBytes, I was, first of all, realizing the same thing you did. I actually played a few horror adjacent games, or even some horror games. So like I played like bits of Resident Evil. I don't think I've ever played. I know of in part of the story of Silent Hill, but haven't played, I think, any of the games. But Alone in the Dark and things like that, like more retro stuff, I played. And then I remembered a specific game that I played that I think has horror elements as well, which is Echo the Dolphin. Especially the first one.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're talking about
that gets into some eldritch
right?
alien stuff like that. That goes to some places.
I was thinking, I was watching the I think the licensed games episode, the second episode, and I was thinking of like they were discussing like specific elements of horror games, and I was thinking about Echo the whole time. Like, and you mentioned Richard, like Tomb Raider 2, you're swimming around, you don't know where you're going, you run out of air easily. Those are all the ingredients in the whole of Echo 1, especially. I think Echo 2 is a little bit less, although it's in terms of story, in terms of like some of the moments is a little bit like that as well. But I think Echo 1, especially for me at the time, at a very young age, it was really, really scary. Like there's like a giant octopus or something, and you have to swim slowly past the octopus while running out of air at the same time. And like if you move, it like attacks you. So yeah. So that's what I realized. There's more to horror than just survival horror, and there are, even if the game is not itself is not like a proper horror game, it has horror moments, horror elements to it, which makes this documentary interesting for everyone, I think. Right. And so let's get a bit into this. So TerrorBytes, the evolution of horror gaming. What is it, first of all? And how did the idea come about? I think, Daniel, from what Richard said, you pitched this idea to him, right?
Yeah. So we were sort of with this company, Creative VC, who are big documentary filmmakers within the horror space, most famous for the In Search of Darkness series. And I'd be doing a bit of work with them. And we had, I kind of got the CEO's ear, and I just had a chance to sort of say, we'd just done the first person shooter documentary. And obviously, our biggest documentary was horror. And I was like, as a huge horror gaming guy, I was like, let's just like combine the two. Like, we should be doing a horror gaming documentary. There's so much crossover here. There's so many interesting stories to explore. There's so many interesting people to talk to. And our studio head does not engage with horror games at all. It was a completely alien concept to him. I'm pretty sure he was confused at the concept of there even being horror games. So it was my job to convince him. So he was like, I was saying like, oh no, like they're really big and there's all of like major franchises and look at all the films that have been adapted from them. Like there's an audience for this and stuff. And so he asked me to put together a pitch for him. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get an opportunity like this again anytime soon. So like within like 2 days, I came back to him with like a 40-page sheet or something with just every idea I could ever think of exploring in this documentary. And he was like, this is okay, this is piquing me interest. And so I hadn't met Richard yet, but Richard had worked with the studio head previously on first person shooter documentary. So he handed it to Richard and said, hey, what do you think about this? And Richard was like, yeah, it's kind of broad, which that was on me. I got a little excited and kind of carried away with every single idea on the planet. But then me and Richard kind of connected, and we refined the idea, we focused the idea, we came up with some like episode topics and episode titles and ideas of like subcategories we could explore, different sort of side tangents, how we would sort of structure it. And eventually I think we just got to like a really solid, strong synopsis that, while still broad, covers a lot of ground. It was really focused. And then Richard kind of took to the writing duties from there.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Richard, you want to add something?
Yeah. And so it's 5 episodes, and each one is focused on a topic. So like we've got survival horror, obviously. You have to have survival horror. Then we've got licensed games. You mentioned that before. And then the third one, we got to go more into like a real niche area and tell what I think is a really cool, interesting story, and try to give them the due that they deserve and that they never do. FMV games, everyone jokes about them. You just Night Trap just showed up for a frame there in the trailer that you're showing as we're talking. Of course, we talk a bunch about Night Trap. It's not a scary game, but it is totally in the horror space. It's a really interesting game. It even actually shows up in 2 episodes of TerrorBytes. Because first we talk about the game, get into like how it's designed, why it's so charming in its weird way. And then later, when we get to episode 5, we'll actually bring it up again, because there we're talking about the controversies, how it got caught up in that ridiculous congressional hearing, held up next to Mortal Kombat as everything that's wrong with video games. And these games are corrupting our kids, because in Night Trap, you are dealing with vampires killing a girl in her bathroom with this weird device that they jab in her neck, and they took this seriously. The game is clearly a satire. Anyone who plays it, anyone who watches 2 minutes of footage of it can see it's a satire. It's silly.
Yeah.
It's not even kiddie horror. It's just silly, and yet they know this game is teaching kids how to murder girls. And so we talk about that and some other controversial things in episode 5, as well as rounding out the series. And I skipped over episode 4, which is about indies, and particularly the modern indie space and where that came from, how it's evolved, and just the like unbridled creativity that happens in that space. That may even be the best episode. We haven't quite finished episode 5 yet, but episode 4 is really strong. Episode 3 for me is like the sentimental favorite as a fan of that kind of game, of FMV games and adventure games. I love everything that we covered in episode 3, and I can't say that about any other episode.
Yeah. I was watching. So I watched the first 2 episodes, which are now available. If you purchase this, you get a link to the first 2 episodes, which are now like the preview version. I'm assuming. I don't know if you're editing anything apart from like the backer names.
A few. It's like we've been going through a legal review, and the lawyers like, you've got to get rid of a second or 2 of footage of this game because it's going a bit too egregious. It's not going to pass fair use. It's stuff like that, and some fixes. Like we noticed some errors with credits at the bottom of the screen, like the wrong year on a game, or there's a typo or something, or a credit missing. It's basically little technical things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we may change the theme music as well. We're still toying with that.
Probably will,
but other
actually.
Than that,
yeah.
We've got
another version that's good.
Yeah, but the content itself, is like basically the same, right? So yeah, and I was expecting. So as I said, I'm not a big horror head, so I was expecting to like be okay. So I'm just watching this and like maybe at 2 times speed, or like let's see, and maybe like skip over things that I'm not really that interested. But once I started watching, I looked at the time and okay, so an hour has passed, and I'm just watching this. I have another hour. Why not watch the second episode? So it surprised me at how interesting, like even from like an educational point of view, it is. I was saying this to Richard before we started, but when I think of horror games, and I think I've been like this my whole life. So like, it's a scary game. Yeah, okay, it's a scary game. Like you just put some scary stuff in there, and that's it, and that's the game done. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that people who develop these games don't have like don't work hard on them. But for me, like the concept was very simplistic always, and then not for me apparently. But what I understood after watching these 2 episodes is that like there are a lot of elements that come into play, and like the ideas that they try to realize into these like video games, even back in the day when we had like the most simplistic games ever, like the most simplistic graphics, like the Atari games, the Amiga games, the Commodore games. Even then they were trying to put their hearts into this, and like trying to not really just scare you like for the shock value of it, but like make you feel something. Like you said before, Richard, like the fear, was always the intention of like playing with your mind in a way that's more complex than just like scaring you and that's it. And that I found very interesting and opened my eyes in a way to the reality of developing horror games in a way that I don't think I've ever like fully realized and thought about. So I thank you for that. And so that's why I say that this is not just for horror fans. I think everyone will be very pleased with the result, and like and the amount of guests you get, the amount of people you interviewed for this, right? So 50 plus, I believe.
Yeah,
people?
yeah. We were we were on 49, and I was like, "Damn, we're so close to 50." And then we ended up needing two more people to kind of like add a bit of variety to a couple of segments where one person was kind of dominating talking, and so we brought in two additional guests, and they actually ended up being sort of cast throughout the whole series, not just in those segments, because they had so many interesting things to say. But yes, it was 51 is the final count.
So just so you can say over 50.
Yeah,
Amazing.
you get the
Yeah,
marketing thing.
yeah,
You
that's
get what
it.
I was going for.
Exactly. Awesome. So what were the biggest challenges you faced while producing this, putting this together? I'm guessing the first one was like convincing people to do this, Daniel, right?
Yeah, I mean the I think what I'd like people to understand about the doc before they kind of like see it is like this is a globally shot production. We shot in Japan, we shot in Canada, we shot in America, we shot in the UK, we shot in
Sweden,
Sweden,
Australia.
we shot in Australia. Like it is all over the place. So logistically, doing 51 interviews all across the world, never mind just getting to convince them to come on board. Like that's one challenge. Finding these people, getting a solid contact for them, getting to access such like a wide variety of talent from such a wide variety of backgrounds. Because it's interesting, like some of the big stars were easier to get than somebody smaller, because you have a hard time finding the smaller guy. Like we were really lucky to get Ben Leffler, who is in our indie episode. He's an Australian developer who made some like horror flash games, and like it was fun. I think it was Richard eventually tracked him down. But yeah, like we had to plan like and schedule so many things at once, and we have like backers to kind of who've put their faith in us, and so we owe it to them to deliver something. So we couldn't just sort of like, well, we'll just wait until we've got all of the interviews and then we'll start post-production. Like it was like production and post-production had like an overlap, so that we could be showing people like, hey, look, we are working on this thing. Like here's some bits of episode 1 from interviews we've already got. Here's some behind the scenes footage. And so trying to plan, like we had one shoot where we had to kind of wrangle 7 people from 7 different countries who were all going to be at this conference at one point. And like we had to do all those interviews back to back to sort of try and manage around like, well, this way we don't need to send someone to New Zealand, and we don't need to send someone to Texas, and we don't need to send someone to I think it was like California, and so there was all that logistical challenge, and and then obviously once you've got them in a room, you have a limited amount of time with these people, and it was making that time count. We went really hard in on the interviews. I mean, you'll see it in the final product. We left like no stone unturned. Some of the interviews we ended up doing were like over 3 hours long.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think there was anyone that was shorter than 1 hour. I would say the mostly averaged out to like 2 to 3. But we just needed to make those moments count. And that's where Richard's incredible writing came in. Obviously, we knew the kind of beats we wanted to hit and the structure we wanted to kind of compose. But you are, still beholden. You can't put words into your guest's mouth. There was quite often we would say, we'd kind of be hoping to cover, X game, only to find out like of the 51 people we've interviewed, one of them had played it. and that became like a kind of thing of like, well, we want to talk to obviously John Romero about Doom, we want to obviously talk to Akira Yamaoka about Silent Hill, but we wanted to get also their thoughts on like what games inspired you, what games did you find interesting as a developer. There's lots of Thomas Grip from the Frictional Games. He created like Amnesia and stuff. Him talking about like different games and how they use fear. You know, we'll have like people who didn't work on Silent Hill talking about Silent Hill as an accompaniment to like Akira Yamaoka's commentary. And so navigating those kind of conversations beforehand, it sounds pretty easy, but when there's 51 of them and you're keeping a schedule for 51 different people and managing across, the other thing as well, we work across time zones. So I'm in the UK, Richard's in Australia, well, guests in America, and it's just like, it was crazy. And it was just sort of making all those moments count, and you know, making sure that, you know, we use the budget that had been, you know, entrusted to us by backers who, you know, at that point in the first campaign, all we had was a sizzle reel and a promise and a reputation to deliver stuff, and they trusted us with that. And we were like, okay, well, we've got to make this count, we've got to do as much as we can with what we've got. And it was just it was a logistical nightmare, but it was also incredibly fun because a year of my job just now has literally been, hey, talk to everybody who's ever inspired you. and that's like, you can't get a bigger dream role than that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And if you go to the website, to the TerrorBytes website, you have like the list of people, like we said, 50 plus legends that were interviewed, right? And those, we have some big names here. And
everybody was crazy nice. And I know I'm supposed to say that, I'm like obligated to say that, but I do actually mean it. It was insane. Like every single person was so accommodating and so nice and so giving with their answers and so happy to be interviewed. And what I found really surprising and really rewarding was how like, and you know, credit to our guests for taking us to those places, but how like genuinely vulnerable some of them were willing to be. You know, we talked a bit before about the Night Trap controversy and all that, and we always think this is something that I really hope people take away from the series, because I don't think this has ever really been explored before. We always think of that Night Trap controversy as kind of like a funny little anecdote, like a cliff note in the history of games. Oh, do you remember that time Night Trap was taken to the Supreme Court? What I've never heard anybody kind of cover until we literally sat down and talked to the developer, Rob Phillip. I've never heard somebody cover the human cost of that.
Yeah.
Being the person who is suddenly, for making a completely harmless bit of software, the number one most hated man in America, and being told, you know, people broadcasting your product on TV and saying, this is responsible for all of society's ills. This is why misogyny exists. This is the most violent thing. Basically painting you out to be like no better than like a hardcore drug dealer selling to kids. Like, and it wasn't until I sat with Rob Phillip and, you know, he's talking about like the effect that had on his life. I was like, oh man, like I'd never considered this. And, you know, we had, like, I don't want to spoil it. You'll have seen in episode 1, Jeremy Blaustein, when talking about Silent Hill 2, goes to some like heavy places and stuff. The guests were incredible and they were really giving. And I think every single episode has at least one, if not more, like real emotional hook for me, where someone kind of like just gives with something that isn't. I want this doc to be about games, but it's also about the people who make them, and I think everybody. I think every episode at one point has something where someone gives us a lot, and I was extremely grateful for that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's like you really get the sense of what goes into making these games, like even just the planning stages, and right, it's not like just slapping. Even the licensed games, right? The episode 2 focuses on licenses and how sometimes game development is very unfair in the way that like we have a plan, we have a budget, we have a time frame to develop this, but then there's some producer or someone like a CEO or something that has the money and has the power to actually control what happens next, and maybe we don't want to do that. We're not passionate about that new idea. I don't remember what the game exactly was, but they mentioned like Metal Gear Solid coming out, or Metal Gear Solid
Buffy.
2.
Yeah,
The Buffy, the Buffy game, and then like some suit comes out, and I want to have Buffy hide in a box, like Snake does, and like
because when you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you're obviously thinking, "Oh, that character is just like Solid Snake."
exactly.
That's exactly what you think.
and they say no, we don't have the time, we don't have the budget, we have to delay the game. You need more money if you want us to do that, to work on that. Oh no, but I have someone somewhere who can do that for the same amount of money, same time, no problem. And then the result was amazing. But it's really unfair for people who devote a big portion of their lives to a project, are passionate about that project, and then something like this happens. So
Yeah,
and it's easy for us as like just gamers to just like bash the development team or something without knowing what's going on in the like backstage.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I interrupted you, I think. Sorry, Daniel.
That's all good.
No.
I was just agreeing with you. I was saying like speaking of like people pouring passion and effort into stuff and then not seeing the reward of it. In episode 5, we talk about a game that wasn't even officially released. These people went to the trouble of literally completing a game, and then it never actually came out, and that is Thrill Kill. So that's like a whole crazy story in of itself of just people having this kind of rug pulled from under them at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
after having gone through all these hoops for the executives who were interfering the whole way.
Mm-hmm. So to your point of like this being about the people, I think that's clear enough for the viewer that's the idea. We get like that emotional attachment to the people who are like talking about their experiences developing these games. So yeah, well done. So I'm guessing one of the challenges here, and maybe this one goes out for you, Richard, as well, because you're the writer of this documentary. But the challenge was also to like narrow down what exactly the documentary would be, right? So especially since Daniel had so many good ideas, 40 plus pages, right? Of ideas. So how do you do that? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of this layered, multi-stage process. It all begins with like sort of the top level. What is TerrorBytes about, and what are some themes that we want to explore in this thing? And so for me, it pretty quickly became apparent that we need to explore what even is horror in games. It's not just survival horror. So what is it? Let's in every episode talk about this. Let's bring up games that aren't conventionally thought of as horror. Let's get every contributor to talk about what horror means to them, and just explore this thing. What is horror? Why do people love horror? How can horror manifest in games? These become good top-level themes for us to explore as we're looking at this huge breadth of the genre and how it's evolved over time. Obviously, we've got to have some old stuff, we've got to have some newer stuff, some stuff in between, because it's not showing the evolution unless we're doing that. So that's the starting point, all of that. And then put in the must-have games. Like, we can't have a horror documentary and not talk about at least a couple of Silent Hill games, at least a couple of Resident Evils. We can't talk about indies without having like David Szymanski's games, and we gotta get Faith in there if we can, from Airdorf. That's like a huge thing. That's done great work, sort of throwing back to Commodore 64 type graphics while making it totally modern and new and really freaky with the animations. We got to try and get into Flash games because that's sort of the roots of the modern indie scene. and then also talk to like foundational people like Thomas Grip talking about the first Amnesia game, Jasper Byrne talking about Lone Survivor. And Jasper, by the way, is another one of those people who was very kind and going really vulnerable. I don't want to spoil what we cover in the Lone Survivor segment, but it's a very personal game to him. And it was beautiful that he allowed us in to see what it means to him. And so every episode, it's like we start to put in these key games and then think about, well, what are the episode themes and what are some good deep cuts that we can think about as well, because we don't want it to just be surface level, here's the big games. We want to actually encompass what this topic is as much as we can within the time limit that we have, because every episode's got to be about an hour. We got permission pretty late on to go longer on episode 1, but we have only so much space that we can cover these things, and I wanted there to be a sort of satisfying narrative arc for every episode, some sort of cohesion, so it's not just bam, 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 bam. You're actually going on a journey through this whole thing. Everything's building to a bigger idea. So what is that bigger idea? What are the themes of the episodes? And that took some discussion with Dan. That took some thinking about what are the patterns and the common elements across different games, and also just conducting the interviews and doing the research in advance of the interviews and looking at what are people saying, what are the patterns in their stories, what are some themes that are emerging as I'm looking at this. Like in the indie episode again, there's a segment that I love. It's one of my favorite bits in the whole documentary about like feelings of desolation, powerlessness, and social isolation, where we're pulling together, I think it's 4 different games, and exploring them in this segment, all intertwined with each other as the ways that they explore this idea and how it can manifest and why it's so powerful and effective in a horror game. So it's just heaps of sort of reading transcripts, remembering what people were saying when we were interviewing them, thinking about what's the big exciting moments or the bits that made our hearts leap in as we're going along, hearing the stories. Graham Devine, 7th Guest co-creator, is just beautiful in this. He literally cried on camera. It's a really special moment in episode 3. And somehow, I don't know exactly how my mind works, but I put these, I think in patterns, and I read everything, I look at everything, and it starts to emerge in my head how this forms together, and bit by bit the themes kind of coalesce into something, and I work to figure out exactly what the running order is of the segments. I come up with runtime targets to make sure that we don't end up with an hour-long episode that has a rough cut of 2 hours, because that's a nightmare to cut back. I want to be roughly in line with our targets right from the beginning. And then I think, well, how do I get from this to this? And I pour through our transcripts. We even, as Dan said, we did a couple of extra interviews at the end. Some of the questions in those interviews were tailored specifically to hit those transitions between segments. It's just, I want to connect this game to this game. And in some cases, it was just, can you think of a way to connect this game to this game? And in others, I already had the idea, and we prompted them, and we didn't necessarily tell them exactly what to say, but we said, we want you to connect this and this by talking about that.
Okay.
And that gives us the narrative glue that we need to connect the bits together. It works pretty well.
Excellent. By the way, how different is this, and which one is more difficult, I guess, from writing a book? It depends.
They're both harder than each other in different ways.
Okay.
The tricky thing with a documentary like this is that we don't have a narrator, so it's everything that's in there is our talking heads and B-roll, like news archives, gameplay, whatever stuff we can find. So if I need to give you context about something, I need to find footage that gives you the context. If I need to paint a picture that gets you from A to B in your head, or need to give you details about something, need to take you on some narrative journey, I cannot put my own voice in there. I'm not there. I can't do anything except work with what I have. And that can be really tricky. Sometimes people are super unclear with how they say things. Sometimes in the interview, they've taken 5 minutes to say something. We only have 1 minute to actually have that material. How do we cut that down? There are times in interviews where we will hear someone say something and we're like, can you say that again, but more briefly? Or can you say it again, but slightly different? But it's impossible to catch all of those kinds of moments in advance because you don't know what you need until you're writing. That's why we do these 2-hour, 3-hour interviews with each person when we're only going to use maybe 10 minutes of the interview in the documentary. Yeah. We intentionally get too much stuff so that we can do more with it when it comes writing time. So that's all really hard to do.
By the way, the lack of I didn't even think of that. That didn't even occur to me. I didn't miss it. But the lack of narrator, is that a choice? Is that out of need because of the format?
Yeah, it's mostly down to the format, and so we're making this for a studio, a production company called Creative EC. They have their format. They have the way that they do documentaries. We need to more or less fit in with that. And the idea is that every game or every idea is covered in a segment, and that segment needs to be able to stand on its own. So you can jump around. You can, when you've got your Blu-ray, you can go, I want to watch this thing that's in the middle and just this. And so with no context, you want to be able to watch that and enjoy that. You want to be able to watch things out of order. We craft it to work best when you go from the beginning to the end, but you can go into anything that you like. If Silent Hill 2 is your favorite game, you can just keep watching the Silent Hill 2 segment over and over, and you don't need to worry about the stuff that is covered in the documentary before that. That can just be your thing. And so it's like a rule that we have to do that within the company. That is the format that we have to work to. We can't go away from that. And what works best with that is not having a narrator. It's just having your talking heads, figuring out a way to make those all combine together. And
Fair enough.
And and the other side of it, I guess, is sort of nostalgia. It's like with TerrorBytes, we wanted to go beyond nostalgia, but nostalgia is the core of what the company sells in its documentaries. That's how they get you at the beginning, and it's so nostalgic to have a person gushing about this thing that you love, rather than a disembodied narrator saying in their neutral voice, Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001 and it thrust the series forward into new new uncharted borders or whatever.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's nice to see game developers or musicians or whatever it is talking about other people's projects in such a way, right? So they're gushing about other people's projects that they are passionate about. So that's also, I think that also contributes to get the feeling of nostalgia and like the passion behind these games.
I think it creates a sense of community as well. You know, when you see, Akira Yamaoka gushing about Resident Evil, but he's not specifically just saying like, oh, it's a good game. He's like, oh, that was kind of what made us realize how fixed camera angles work. And you sort of, it really ties into the evolution subtitle of our doc, because you're sort of seeing how, one artist kind of turns the cogs in another artist's brain, and suddenly they come out with something that's completely different, but the seed was planted in them from that original stuff. Like a great example is in episode 3 we have Sam Barlow, who's kind of the modern master of the FMV game, a format that, you know, was thought to be pointless now and kind of dead. He sort of brought it back, and hearing him talk about what FMV games did in the past that I guess like he noticed, but maybe the mainstream didn't, in the constant derision of them. Like he's got a great little speech about what FMV games did, and it wasn't until he said it that even I clicked on. Like I was like, oh yeah, no, that is interesting. He sort of pointed to FMV games as being an enabler of new genres within video games. You know, they were kind of the first ones to do the legal thriller, or like the you know, the kind of like murder mystery, and like all of these kind of like personal drama narratives. Like that hadn't really been done in video games until the FMVs come along. So, you know, yeah, they're corny, yeah, they're cheesy, yeah, they've aged a bit weirdly, but like that's such a like important step in storytelling, and it's great to hear somebody who, you know, clearly noticed that and recognized it, put it into such succinct words that really celebrate something that's often derided.
Yeah, and like you said, they go into specifics about why they like certain games, why they think certain games are influential, right? The influences, like people talking about Deadly Premonition in episode 2, which is maybe sometimes regarded as not a great game, but how important it was for them, or the influences behind the creation of the game. I found that very interesting. So like I'm an outsider looking in a way, as not a very knowledgeable fan of the genre, but I found this very, very interesting in how everyone is connected in a way in this like community of game developers, which is really, really nice. Yeah. So because obviously we're on the SEGA Lounge, so we have to tie this in with the SEGA side of stuff, right? For our audience here, SEGA fans. There's a segment in episode 2 about Alien Isolation, which is the first horror game that I actually say that I enjoy, and I don't know why it clicked for me. I think it was during the pandemic. People started streaming. I also started streaming. And then there was Alien Isolation, which was quite popular at the time for streamers, and how much of a challenge it was and how fun it was for people watching to see us suffer through that. But I can say now, after having played the game like I think 4 times, one streaming and the other ones for my pure enjoyment, I love this game. And so I really enjoyed a brief look into the AI of the alien and how they built that like the ambience in the game to make you feel tense all the time. So how easy or hard was it to get information about Alien Isolation?
That was quite an interesting interview, because Andy Bray, the guy who excellent speaker, but is focused on such a specific niche in video games. Like he could speak to that video game and that video game alone. But you know, he gave lots of great information on it. But that was kind of one of the production challenges, actually, that we would quite regularly. Rob Fulop was another one where we were like, "Hey, we're doing this horror game documentary. We'd love you to be a part of it." And we found with certain people, some of them were like, "Me, horror game documentary? Like, why? And we had to kind of like convince them and be like, no, like you're actually like a really important part of horror gaming history. And people were just like, am I? Like, are you sure about that? And I'm like, no, we're sure. We're confident on this. But Andy Bray was one of the guys that we had to kind of like convince a little bit. And I'm really glad we did, because I think the Alien Isolation segment is great. And I think Andy is such a like really compelling speaker on like his work and his team's work. He really, I mean, clearly, like he's he's basically a genius within his field, and he clearly like really understood the like exactly what they did to kind of make that whole thing tick, and whole like all of the machinations that kind of go on behind the scenes. And it was just really interesting to have somebody who was like so well versed in like these incredibly complex solutions to big difficult mechanics, explain it in such a way, like in a way that was so like accessible, but like still communicated like the level of like intelligent craftsmanship required to create those things. Like that so the to answer your question, sort of difficult, but just took a little bit of convincing.
Okay. Yeah, one thing, without spoiling too much, but one thing that I never really thought of is how other Alien or Aliens games have a killable xenomorph, right? Which is not the case in Alien Isolation. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it, and adds to the tension in that game, which is ever present.
And you'd think that someone would have tried that before that, but this is the thing with licensed games. It's like when you're developing them, you're often given instructions from above. You can't be creative because you've got a brief, and so even though there's so many Aliens games, it wasn't until this one where finally there was someone who pushed back against that. They're like, no, wait, think about the movies. What is scary about the movies? Why are the movies such an effective piece of horror? It's the fact that alien, when you see it, is too late. You're already dead.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that's it. That's the end. And we've got Sam Barlow talking briefly in episode 5 about one of the early Alien games on Amstrad CPC, and how effectively the alien gets you in that, and it's really scary. But the alien is still killable in there, even though the game is really hard and you're probably going to die, and that's what makes it so tense. You can still kill it. And so here you finally, in Alien Isolation, had someone with the courage to go, no, the enemy is not going to be killable. and that in games, that's a really controversial thing to do. You should always be able to kill the enemy.
Of course.
How dare you make an unkillable enemy? I'm sure there are heaps of gamers who came across the xenomorph in that game, and they've got their flamethrower and they're just and they're trying to chase after it, and they're thinking, I'm going to kill you. And you ran away from me. Next time I'll be ready for you. I'm going to get you. And they must have spent hours before they realized that actually you can never kill it. It's always going to get you.
If you waste your fuel, you're dead. So it's such an important moment in that game when you get the flamethrower. But it's an amazing game. Yeah, you also mentioned like Rob Fulop from Night Trap. That was, so he was hard to convince as well.
He was real. Like, not that he didn't want to do it. He was very, open and lovely once he was there. He just didn't see himself as a horror game director at all. Okay. Like, he just didn't get it. He doesn't even, it's really interesting hearing from him about Night Trap, because he's like, I don't even consider it a game, really. And it's like, wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he says it's like it's not even really horror. At best, it's Scooby-Doo. It's like there's nothing about it that should be scary. And so because of that, I had to, across multiple emails, convince him. And I've interviewed him before, so we had some kind of basic relationship there. I had talked to him about the thing he did after Night Trap, a game about like a pet on your screen, a digital pet on your screen, a kitten or a puppy, and so I talked to him about that. So I don't know how much that was helping, but that seemed like it made him a little more willing to hear me out as I'm trying to convince him that yes, we consider Night Trap to be very important. It's one of the pivotal games in this FMV episode, we can't not have someone who worked on it, and we think you are the most interesting one to talk to because you were the designer. You came up with the game-ish elements of it, the interactive parts of it. So that's what we want to focus on. We want to explore the interactivity of Night Trap and how that kind of set things in motion for this whole full motion video genre.
Yeah. Excellent. That's great. That's great. Yeah. So I was there's always like some sort of difficulty in getting everyone that you want, right? So I was curious about that, and I find it interesting that some people, I get that when I try to interview people for this show as well. It's like some people don't think, why me? Like they're not worthy of being on, like having the spotlight on them, right? Like, why me? I'm nobody. I didn't do anything special. So that's funny in a way. When some other people are like, hey, I'm here. Let's talk about me. So it's a nice little contrast there, I think. Okay, guys. So I don't want to keep you too long. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell people how they can get TerrorBytes. So this is, as people are listening this, as this is airing and like going live to all the platforms, if you're watching or listening to this in the first few days that it's been uploaded, you can still pre-order TerrorBytes, The Evolution of Horror Gaming. So can you tell us a little bit about what that entails, what people get when they pre-order?
Yeah. So if you go to terrorbytesdoc.com, that's TerrorBytes.com. You will find our order page. You can order a digital version or a physical version with a bunch of goodies. Either way, whichever version you order, you will get the first 2 episodes of the documentary instantly. And after the campaign finishes, you will receive the other 3 the following month to early May. And you will also receive, as an added bonus, our entire first-person shooter documentary for free. And yeah, that's all available on the website. You can see the trailer, you can see the full cast, you can see all the different versions. Everything's there. Check it out. It should all be pretty clear on there, but basically that's the gist. TerrorBytesDoc.com. Grab your copy now.
Excellent. That's a very nice pitch, like brief, succinct, yeah, to the point. Well done. Okay.
And I guess just the one thing to add to that is that if you're interested in a physical copy, we won't be like selling that. Digital is still up in the air a little bit. What's going to happen? What the availability will be in the future. But physical, it's like there's this campaign, and then we'll probably have one campaign some point in the future, but not for a while, and that's it. We're not gonna like have it up on a store or you can buy it whenever you want. It's like now. You want to do it now. If you're interested and you can afford it, you want to do it.
It may even be that in the next campaign we have sold so much physical on this campaign that we don't have physicals for the next campaign. So it could be that the next campaign is digital only. So yes, as Richard said, if you want a physical copy, now would be the time to grab that.
Yeah. So let's say people are listening to this like a month from now and, oh no, I've missed out on the pre-order campaign. So there will be another one. Just so there's no guarantee.
Yes. We don't know when. We don't know when. We don't know how it's going to take form. Currently, we're just trying to get through this campaign, and it's a lot of work. So we're focused on that. There'll be probably something in the future where you can acquire this in some capacity. But what I would say is if you want to stay up to date, follow us on our socials. So that's at TerrorBytesDoc on basically everything. And then the Blue Sky one is just, the bsky.social.TerrorBytesDoc. I'm not sure how they order their URL system, but it's that. It's the standard one. Yeah. And just put TerrorBytesDoc where you would be expecting to put it.
Okay. Makes sense. So just stay up to date that way. One thing before we go. So you obviously, you said like some people were interviewed for like 3 hours. So there's a lot of content here. And I feel like you guys like put the finger on the pulse of the horror gaming community. So what do you think after doing this, after being exposed to all this information, what do you think, where do you see horror gaming going in the future? What does it look like, the future of horror gaming? I'm talking to the experts now. So
Well, I'll try and keep my thoughts brief because I could give a long answer to that. I think, and this isn't necessarily a horror gaming thing. This is a gaming thing. I think we're seeing a lot of really bloated budgets in the AAA space. I think besides Resident Evil, besides Silent Hill, horror is going to be a hard sell in that space from here on out, because you kind of have to make broad strokes games to kind of like warrant the kind of budget of something like a God of War or a Spider-Man 2 or a Horizon Zero Dawn. Resident Evil will always sell gangbusters, so they're safe. Silent Hill's just had a brilliant renaissance with the remake, so I think they're safe. I don't know that we're going to see much new horror IP in spaces where there's so much money involved they can't afford to be experimental anymore. But what I think we're going to get is, I think we're already seeing it, to be honest. When we think of the turning point for horror games, it's the PS1. The PS1 and then bleeding into the PS2, that was like horror games became like a thing. There were horror games before that, but like Resident Evil sort of came out, changed the whole landscape. Suddenly there's loads of these games doing like fixed camera angles, and not just the big obvious ones. There's stuff like Vampire Hunter D and Martian Gothic in there. You know, it was anybody's, you know, opportunity to make like a survival horror game, and there was enough of an audience there and a low enough budgetary requirement there that you kind of get onto that playing field. I don't think we're going to see that in mainstream gaming. What I do think we're going to see is a second revolution, and again, I think it's already happening in the indie space. I think indies are going to lead the way in horror, and that's because horror by nature as a genre is transgressive. It's experimental. It's different. This is true in books. This is true in films. It's certainly true in games. And the places where you have the artistic freedom to experiment with new ideas and new creations and new ways to scare people and difficult narratives that wouldn't necessarily sell to a mainstream audience because of the topics that they cover and the tabooness of horror, that's in the indie space. And outside of that, I think VR is going to be really big for horror. It kind of already is, but if VR gets even bigger, I think VR budgetary requirements are a bit lesser than the mainstream. Well, they're not. I don't think they're a bit lesser. They're a lot lesser than the current like mainstream PS5 title. So I think VR is going to be even more popular as a horror format, especially as like streamers adopt more and more. You know, everybody loves to watch somebody be scared.
yeah.
And yeah, I think they're going to be. So I think VR and indie is going to be the leading spaces in horror, especially with regards to indie.
Mhm.
And hopefully it'll get to be such a big thing that we'll kind of see that loop back round, and the big players start to take notice and go, hey, the indie space is being completely populated and completely dominated by horror games. Maybe we should give them a shot again.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah, and shout out to you. You have the I think the writer for Slay the Princess. Which,
yes, Abby Howard and Tony Howard. We have both of the developers of Slay the Princess.
Yeah, and so that's a game that I have experienced and enjoy. So
yeah,
and
sorry,
it's an indie one.
It's Howard Arias. I should get their names right because I don't want to give them preference on like who's hyphen Howard
Abby
Arias.
and Tony, right?
Yeah.
I'm checking on the website now. Yeah. Okay. By the way, so speaking of like bigger players, Alien Isolation 2 is coming as well. So
that's
hopefully
true.
that'll be good. Hopefully that'll be good.
Yeah.
So yeah. I tend to agree with you in like a broader gaming scene as well. I think that's the way things are going as well because of the like you mentioned, bloated like budgets. Companies are spending a lot of money on games, is expecting too much as well in return. Okay.
The one thing to add to like what happens, and this has happened before, it's going to keep happening because everything goes in cycles, is that as that indie takeover is happening of the gaming space, more and more indies will get big. Like they'll get rich as studios, and then they
Stop
kind of
being
reach a point
indies.
where they're not really indie anymore.
Yeah.
Indie's kind of, it's a loaded term now. It's lost a lot of its original meaning. And so they'll step up from being what pretty much anybody would consider an indie to being like a double A or something. They'll be just a regular commercial studio, a smaller commercial studio, or become a publisher, like a New Blood Interactive. We talked to Dave Oshry in this, and they have kind of become a developer publisher, and they're doing really well. They're still a fairly small team, but they are in that process of moving beyond what you would typically class as indie, and so that's going to be a thing that's happening, just as it has before. The original game developers were indies, and then they were successful, and they became publishers. Like that's how Sierra got started, for instance. Ken and Roberta Williams put out some games, and then they did well, and so they became a publisher. They started selling other people's games, and that is always what happens. We go in these cycles. There's boom and bust at the top end, and then people bubble up from the indie side.
Yeah. And indie these days is more of a style than actually independent. I think for many people, they see a certain style of game or graphics, and, that's an indie game. Not necessarily, but yeah, it's part of like the cycle, like you said. Right. Okay, I have a complaint, by the way, which is you didn't include anything about Blue Stinger on the Dreamcast.
But I was wondering if we would get a chance to mention Blue Stinger.
Nice.
Because I know it's a bit of a cheese fest, but I really love that game. I literally, it's literally there. I'm gonna go get it now just to sort of prove my Sega credentials.
While he's doing that, the Sega game that I was bummed to not be able to cover was Typing of the Dead.
Okay.
I thought that would be really fun to have in there. It's a horror thing, but you're typing words.
There we go. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Typing of the Dead, and yeah.
But yeah, Sega, I actually think are very unsung heroes in the horror world, and obviously we have such a specific time frame to fill within the doc, that there was lots of like harsh cuts we kind of had to make. There's some stuff that we would have loved to have covered that just didn't fit the overall theme of an episode, or couldn't kind of there wasn't enough people that kind of played it, or we couldn't get the right interview to kind of cover that topic. And I think what we do have there is like incredibly expansive and really broad, while still being like a really focused thesis about horror games in general. But I do think Sega are quite unsung heroes within the horror world. They've got a bunch of really cool and interesting exclusives. Blue Stinger, for as cheesy as it is, has like a really interesting overarching narrative and presentation style. I love that kind of like cyber 2000s millennium shine it has, that was really popular at the time, and there's not really another horror game that's in that space. Like it's very it looks very Sonic Adventure 1 kind of Station Square area. And then you've got stuff like Illbleed, obviously Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is a fan favorite. I think more people played the X version that kind of got ported later to PS2, but it was originally a Dreamcast game. And then, going as far back as the Mega Drive or the Genesis, if you're American, we have stuff like the Castlevania Bloodlines, which obviously was like a really interesting take on Castlevania with a more kind of industrial sound to its soundtrack. And then obviously House of the Dead is like such a huge factor. Fun little anecdote, George Romero credited, the godfather of the zombie movie, credited the 2000 zombie renaissance as being responsible, as House of the Dead and Resident Evil as the 1-2 punch combo that was responsible for that renaissance of like zombies being a popular thing in pop culture again.
Makes sense.
There's some cool stuff on Sega. There really is. There's like, even if you go back to like, there's a game on Mega Drive or Genesis called like Haunting of Frights or something, and it's a really like cartoony one where you play as a ghost and you have to like possess things to scare like people in a house. It's great fun. There's lots of hidden gems.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors, although not an exclusive, but also I was thinking about D and D2, which are
Deep Fear
and D2
on the Sega Saturn.
Yeah.
Deep Fear, excellent Resident Evil clone with like an underwater motif. And again, not an exclusive, but I actually really would put Out of This World or Another World, depending on whereabout in the world you're from. I'd actually say that has some real horror roots. And personally, for me, I played that on Mega Drive. That was my kind of first encounter with Eric Chahi, I believe, Eric Chahi's game. It was the Sega 32X that got the exclusive sequel, I believe.
Probably
Shadow of the Beast. I'm not sure what the clock was called, it was an exclusive. The exclusive sequel was a Sega exclusive. I think there's some really like interesting horror in that. I remember as a kid, it was probably the first game to scare me, specifically when your car sort of travels through time and you spawn in that pool. I didn't realize if you hung about in the pool, the tentacles came up and pulled you under. That was really frightening. And then when you go all the way to the right of the screen and there's that bear monster thing that chases you all the way left and you have to jump on the rope, and it would always kill me. It took me forever to work out what I had to do to get away from it, but it always scared the hell out of me. Sega's got some horror chops. And now obviously they're putting out Alien Isolation.
And obviously Echo the Dolphin is
and Echo the Dolphin. Undoubtedly
number one,
greatest horror game ever.
Exactly. Okay, so Richard and Daniel, thank you very much for coming. What do you want to say to the fans, to the people listening in who are on the fence now? Like, so last pitch here, last few hours, let's say, like a couple of days, to pre-order TerrorBytes and get, again, immediately 2 episodes digitally, which is amazing. And I highly recommend these 2 episodes because I've watched them and I was hooked. I wanted more, by the way. So really, really sad that it's not, we didn't get the other ones yet, but okay, I'll wait.
Soon.
It's very soon. But for people still on the fence, not sure, what would you say, Richard? You strike me as a marketing person.
I think Dan's the better marketer than me. I'm too I'm too like authentic and modest about how I talk about things. But I guess if you're a horror fan, you have here just this beautiful love letter to the genre and a chance to really learn about how the games you love work and what makes them effective as horror, while also getting a look at the games that inspired the creators of your favorite games. Like, that's just really cool, hearing people like Akira Yamaoka talking about Resident Evil, Dennis Dyack talking about Resident Evil and how it basically led to Eternal Darkness. People who made more modern Silent Hill games, not only explaining why the parts of them that are a bit weird and what was going on behind the scenes to create the problems, but also then talking about how the early Silent Hill games were so effective and what inspired them about them. Just all these really cool things of developers talking about other people's games as well as talking about their own game. I think that's awesome. If you're not a horror fan, it's like, this is your chance to understand a genre that you don't realize is everywhere. Horror is not just a genre. It's an emotion, it's a vibe, it's a theme. It's all over the place. guaranteed, if you play video games, you have played something that has horror in it. Total guarantee, 100%.
Yeah, for
everyone
sure.
will have done it. Even if you're some super casual gamer who only plays like match 3 games, there will have been some moment for you that was horrific. If you want to really stretch it to the limit. Horror is just, it's everywhere, and this is your chance to understand how and why that is, what people who are into horror are getting, and just to get inspired by the humanity of the people who make these games, who are all very vulnerable people who have their own fears and worries, and they pour them into the things that they make. That's the most beautiful thing about TerrorBytes for me. It's that it's a story of people doing something different and trying to make games that take you to another place, that will inspire you or scare you or provide catharsis. And I think just that is the most beautiful thing about this, the human stories.
I agree. Yeah. And so that was very good for a
Yes,
non-marketer.
you are a good marketer.
Yeah. Excellent. Daniel, anything to add to that?
Yeah, to just add to what Richard's saying, I think, people might look at this if you're on the fence and go, horror games, that's not for me. But like, I can tell you now, if you're listening to the Sega Lounge, I bet I could play you the Sonic Drowning theme and your palms would get sweaty. You have experienced horror in games. But ultimately, what I would say to anybody who's on the fence is this isn't a documentary about horror gaming. It's what we maybe set out to make. It's the thing I was passionate about that drove us to make this documentary. But I would say this is a documentary about art and artists and storytelling and the relationship between those three things. And I think if you enjoy or have experienced being human, you can get something out of that. This is a story about people who have made things, the challenges they have faced, and the personal parts of them they have put into their work, despite, the pressures of life and execs and studios. And I think if you can come at it from that angle, you do not need to be into horror games. You do not even need to be into games. You just need to be into people. And if you're not into people,
just need to be a person.
Go to therapy.
Okay. So for the very few humans listening to this, if you're a human, you'll enjoy this. That's a good pitch as well. Well done. Yeah. So, TerrorBytes, the evolution of horror gaming, available in physical or digital form, whatever strikes your fancy. TerrorBytes.com. Is it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's correctly. Right. Okay. So TerrorBytes.com. Links will be in the show notes as per usual, and I highly recommend it. So it actually gets the SEGA Lounge seal of approval. Yeah, there we go. Hey. Seal of approval.
We need a PNG of that. I'm gonna stick that on our socials.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll send it to you. Yeah. So Daniel and Richard, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I think Daniel, you need to come back so we can just talk about the many SEGA games that you enjoyed. Richard, thank you very much again. Hope you keep coming back for more gaming related projects, right? What's next, Richard? A movie? A book about cooking games, maybe. I don't know.
That would be fun. I can tell you that probably what's next to come out is a book about Age of Empires, which I don't think there's been any Sega related releases, so probably a bit beyond the scope of this podcast. But beyond that, we'll see. There's lots of ideas for projects that I'd love to do. Some of them are very strongly Sega related, others are just a bit. But yeah, hopefully I'll be back again talking about some more Sega-related stuff.
Excellent.
It's always fun, and anything that gives me an excuse to get the Dreamcast back out, or to go and play my Mega Drive on the CRT TV that I plucked off the street one day a few years ago.
Amazing. Yeah. And Daniel, I don't know if you heard me, because I think your connection dropped there for a second, but I said you need to come back so we can talk about the many Sega games that you enjoy.
Oh,
right.
Absolutely. I would love any excuse to talk about it. I saw Ryu Hazuki in the background, and I was like, a Shenmue man. I can respect that. I can respect that. Yeah. Like, I have just got a shelf of Dreamcast games just right next to me right here. Power Stone 2, one of my all-time favorites. Obviously, we've voiced Jet Set Radio before. I've got a lot of love for Sega.
Excellent. And I spared you from the horror that is, and now that we mentioned horror, the Sega Lounge challenge. Last time Richard went through a challenge here on the show, and this time I spared you guys from it, but maybe
maybe next time.
Maybe next time, Daniel, you need to come back and...
I'm curious. What is the challenge? I'm curious.
It can be anything I want. That's the horror part.
I see.
Last time, I think we did guessing games from the descriptions in the back of the boxes, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I did all right. I got 2/3 or so of them.
Not bad at all. Yeah. So next time, Daniel, that's the horror
Sounds
part.
Fun.
Anyway, guys, thank you very much for coming, and all the best for TerrorBytes. Okay.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. The Sega Lounge, hosted by me, KC, a Mixed Productions podcast and part of Radio Sega's network of live shows and podcasts. Theme song and incidental music by OSC. Got any suggestions? Drop me an email to podcast@thesegalounge.com. Find us at thesegalounge.com on Blue Sky. Check out our YouTube channel for our video content, and follow us on Twitch to join our Let's Play sessions and live episodes. You can find previous episodes of the show by going to thesegalounge.com, on the TerraPlayer app, and wherever you listen to podcasts.